Coach.
Hello guys， 大家好，欢迎来到我的频道。今天我很荣幸要跟大家介绍 Cliff Wilson， 世界级的自然健美教练之一。他不仅是我上次 WNBF Pro Show 的教练，让我能够达到我有生以来最好的期待，而且他的选手总共赢了125张 Pro 卡，其中87场 Pro Show 和13次世界冠军。他还是一本书的作者，曾经在很多国际会议上发表。我真的很感谢，也很荣幸他可以在我的频道上分享他的专业知识。今天教练会回答一些关于训练、饮食、备赛等等的问题，这些都是1个月前大家从 Instagram 发给我的疑问。因为当时我跟你们说我要访问 Cliff， 所以很谢谢你的参与。如果你们下次想要问问题，请不要忘记关注我的 Instagram， 这样你就不会错过。最后别忘了往下滑去逛逛 Verve 我的赞助商，他们有很好看又舒服的衣服，而且 CP 值很高。你们也可以用我的折扣码 VVSET， 这真的可以帮助我在 YouTube、Instagram 跟你们分享内容。谢谢你们，开始吧。Hey Coach, very good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you may have a lot of work. I know you even have a babysitter looking after your daughter as we speak, right?
Yes, yeah. It's the coach and dad life.
So I just want to say that I myself, and I can speak for my subscribers here in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and other parts of Asia as well. We appreciate your time.
No, I'm glad to be here, and I hope you've been enjoying eating a little bit more after your show. I know that's always a big transition.
Yeah, like I was saying to you, I'm trying to be a little bit more conservative. In past occasions, after comp, I've regained a lot of weight.
There's always that time where it's, you're transitioning back into like a more normal life, you know?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I can go do normal things because I have the energy to do it again, right?
You know, it's quite funny because I have actually kept many habits from the prep and also some of the same foods. I basically been eating like in the morning some egg whites and rice cakes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy it. My wife is like, why are you eating that? Like the comp is over. I'm like, I really like it.
It's funny how taste buds also change during contest prep too. You know, foods that sometimes taste really bland to us in the off season, once you get really, really lean, they taste. I always tell people I'll rave about how flavorful vegetables are when I'm in contest prep. But then, you know, if you find me in the heart of the off season, I'm like, these vegetables are so bland.
Yeah, that's so true. I can totally relate to that. So yeah, thank you so much. And I have a bunch of questions from my followers and subscribers about training and nutrition. So we want to know your insight. You ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's go for it. Let's dig right in.
All right, Coach. First question. Would you recommend to build muscle or lose fat first?
I think it depends on what your current state is. If you are already in your mind too heavy, you know, if you have too much fat, then I would recommend starting to lose fat first. But if you are, you know, pretty lean already, then I would recommend starting to build muscle. But if you're new, you can do both at the same time. If you're new to training, then you can start training hard, have a good program together, and cut calories, and you'll probably see, if you're probably within a few years of training, you'll probably see both happen at the same time. So I'd say if you have too much body fat, start cutting. If you don't have a lot of body fat, start growing.
Got it. Nice. Is there any specific rep range that is better for building muscle?
Oh, that's a controversial one. I would say some are a little bit better than others, but the ranges are wider than people think. You know, usually when people ask that question, they want to hear like 10 to 12 reps is the best. But really, if we're going to say what is the best, it would probably be somewhere in the range of 6 reps to 20 reps. So that I would say that range is probably the best. If you go too low with your rep ranges, if you go below 6 reps, you will gain a lot of power and strength, but it impacts recovery negatively because it's so much demand on your nervous system. But if you go above 20 reps, then there are benefits to doing that as well. But sometimes the load isn't high enough to create those same muscle mass changes. So if I had to pick the best rep range, I would say about 6 reps to 20 reps.
6 to 20 reps. Yeah, I would say that maybe below 6, like you mentioned. Yeah, of course you can build muscle, you can build strength as well, but it wouldn't be very time efficient. Would you agree with that? Right?
Yeah, you have to, because it's hard to get a lot of volume in there in your training when you're performing under 6 reps. And that doesn't mean never go below 6 reps or never go above 20. I think there are some value in going to those ranges every once in a while. But if I had to pick a best rep range for muscle growth, I would say 6 to 20. Because like you said, the volume on you know, and there have been some studies that show that when people are performing 3 rep sets, the recovery demand is just too great to match the volume if they're doing 10 rep sets. So it's a vastly different ball game when you're talking about recovery and trying to recover from a certain amount of volume.
Got it. Let's go to question number 3. Is there any particular diet that is better for building muscle? Say keto, intermittent fasting, or any other diet that you can think of?
No. It's I think that some are going to have better principles than others, but I don't think that usually if your diet has a name, it's not something that I would usually invest heavily in. And it doesn't mean that some of those diets don't have merits for certain people. But ultimately, the best diet that will help you grow, build muscle and lose fat is going to be one you can sustain individually and usually has a decent mixture of the macronutrients. So that you are filling all your nutrient requirements, you're performing well in the gym. Usually these diets that cut out entire macronutrients, like ketogenic dieting, where you're cutting out carbohydrates entirely for the most part, that's going to hinder performance. It's been shown to hinder performance in the weight room. And so, you know, usually anything that's cutting out these entire macronutrient sections are not going to be as beneficial. So generally, I would say try to find something that's a little bit more balanced and try to avoid something that's more fad-like with a name and a title to it.
Got it. Thank you for that. The next question is, if I am trying to bulk, should I still do any cardio?
I would say probably not. You know, if you feel you need it for cardiovascular conditioning and just to stay, because as you know, as I've had you do, I have my clients do very high rep ranges oftentimes. Like, so, you know, we will hit those 20 reps frequently that I talked about, and you know that's painful. Pretty taxing. Yeah, that's pretty taxing for your cardiovascular system. So I will usually not have my clients do it because they're already getting very intense weight training sessions. But if somebody is sticking with some lower rep ranges, you know, it maybe wouldn't hurt to perform 1 or 2 20-minute cardio sessions per week just for the purpose of cardiovascular conditioning. But for the most part, I would recommend staying away from cardio. If your goal is to build muscle, I'd recommend staying away from cardio as much as possible. It's energetically costly. It harms recovery from your weight training sessions. And so it's just not going to benefit you in any way, shape, or form.
How about any like light cardio, say going for a walk or things like that?
That should that's fine. Because, you know, going for a walk, I think that also has a lot of benefits. One, being just an active person in general is a good thing. I think also getting out and going for a walk outside and getting vitamin D from the sun is a useful thing. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend shutting yourself in the house and being like, you know, asking your wife, hey, can you get me something from the fridge? Cliff said I'm not supposed to walk as much. Yeah, and I've seen people do things like that before too, where they really start shutting out their activity. But I would just try to avoid exerting yourself too much in a cardiovascular training session. More, you know, activity is good, but you know, when trying to build muscle, maybe intense cardio activity or moderately intense cardio activity maybe isn't the best thing.
I would like to ask, what do you think is the best form of cardio? Some type of cardio that you recommend that wouldn't impact your recovery?
Yeah, so this is where this gets a little tricky because for athletes, usually like high intensity training, like interval training, HIIT cardio, can be very useful because things like biking or sprinting can be very useful because they're explosive type movements. So they can actually help with training. And I think even in the off season, some high intensity interval training for bodybuilders that are looking to build as much muscle as they can be useful as well, because when you're consuming plenty of calories and you know you're trying to build muscle, if you're gonna try to perform a high intensity cardio session, it's going to be helpful because then you can increase your explosiveness and not be performing a lengthy cardio session. But actually, when you're trying to lose fat, I don't think it's helpful to have these really high intensity cardio sessions because you're already in a caloric deficit, which is very difficult to have proper recovery when you're in a caloric deficit. And then you're going to start hindering your recovery and your energy availability. So like you said, when somebody's trying to lose fat, I actually just think they should walk more. I just think going outside, walking, even just walking on a treadmill, doing something that is not demanding on your body can be really helpful because, we place all these demands on our body all the time when we're in a fat loss phase. Now, I think even something like some light biking can be a helpful tool. Even light jogging, I don't think there's any mode of cardio that's going to be the best. That's honestly a question I get from a lot of my clients is what type of cardio should I be doing? And I'm like, I don't really care as long as you enjoy it and it's not too taxing for you.
Exactly.
Because I mean, I'm sure you've seen it all the time where guys and girls hate doing their cardio sessions. And I'm like, I think that the stress caused by you hating your cardio session is more detrimental than just choosing something different that you kind of can tolerate or maybe enjoy even to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with that. All right, coach. Next question. Will you recommend stretching before a training session?
Not usually. I think maybe just a few very light stretches just to get some blood flowing is okay.
Dynamic stretching instead of like static?
I think a little bit of dynamic and a little bit of static might be okay. But for the most part, I think that your stretch should be in your warm-up in general. Because when you are performing a movement, there is a stretch and a contraction to every movement. So if I'm going to get on a bench press and try to bench press 200 pounds, if I first perform that movement with just the bar, I'm running through a stretch multiple times in that. It shouldn't be too heavy to where I can't tolerate that stretch. And so if you warm up properly and you build weights up properly, you're stretching on every single rep and you're stretching against tension. But oftentimes people run through very lengthy static and dynamic stretching protocols, which in my opinion usually end up just weakening their ability to tolerate that tension when they get up there. And sometimes I think it can provide a false sense of security because they're stretching against not much tension at all. And then they feel they've increased their blood flow, which is oftentimes what they're trying to do is just increase the blood flow. And then they put too much weight on the bar to begin with, and their muscle isn't thoroughly warmed up enough and prepared for the tension available. So I instead of stretching, I would recommend more sub-maximal intensity warm-up sets to build up. I always call them weight acclimation sets. So, if you're going to work up to, 200 pounds or, 100 kilos or something along those lines, then, just maybe do 3 or 4 progressive warm-up sets to get to that point.
So basically, your muscles need to be warmed up first. You want to increase that core temperature first before proceeding to any kind of a stretching.
Yeah. I think warm up should be one goal, increase blood flow and warming up. And then another one is weight acclimation. And I don't think that stretching by itself really achieves all of those. Usually just running through the exercise that you are going to do in a progressive manner will take care of all of that.
Next question. What kind of equipment is better for muscle gains? Free weights, machines, cables? What do you think?
All of them. I love them all. They all have benefits and drawbacks. And man, this is probably a topic that we could go on and on about. But a perfect example is, all right, I always say that the most controversy I ever get on my Instagram is when I post a video of myself doing a dumbbell kickback. Because everybody hates the dumbbell kickback for some reason.
I don't know why. Like, oh, I love it.
Yeah, I do too. It's one of my favorites. They're like, people come on and they complain because they're like, oh, there's no tension provided in the stretch position. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. But most free weights are lacking in that regard. They don't provide tension in one part of the movement typically because we're bound by gravity. And so it doesn't mean you stop doing deadlifts or squats or, bench press or anything like that, because they all have areas where there's not a lot of tension provided. But I think that there are benefits and drawbacks to each of them. Usually free weights provide a little bit more freedom to adjust your body throughout the movement to create even greater stretches or contractions throughout the movement. Machines work really well to provide often a little more linear tension throughout an exercise. And cables kind of, I would say, hit that middle ground. They kind of provide some of the benefits of free weights and some of the benefits of machines. My recommendation for people is to go with what you feel the most. Some people call it mind-muscle connection. I usually tend to call it activation. So if you're doing a dumbbell bench press movement, if your pecs are activating, if you have a mind-muscle connection with your pecs, that's a good thing because, I mean, anybody who's been in the gym a while will tell you, and the research also shows that those who can activate and engage a muscle group more during an exercise will build more because you're providing more tension towards the muscle group that you're working. And so for that reason, I always tell people, don't force yourself to do an exercise that you don't feel. I hear it all the time where people are like, for a big chest, you have to bench press. You have to bench press. And oftentimes guys that don't have big pecs, they cannot feel their pecs on a bench press at all. Exactly. But the big guys are always like, you have to do bench press. So I think that usually if you have a free weight movement, there's usually an equivalent or an alternate machine and a cable movement along those lines. I can do a dumbbell curl, or I can do a machine curl, or I can do a cable curl. My recommendation is whatever one of those three you feel the biceps working the most, do that one. Doesn't mean never do the other one. You can try it from time to time, but I would say the majority of the time, go with the one you're feeling working the most.
Got it. Yeah, I usually tell people that when it comes to building muscle, there's a lot of freedom. Like there's a lot of path that you can take to achieve your goals, right? Because if you look at a strength, for example, say if you're a power lifter, of course you got a bench, right? You got a bench, you got a deadlift, etc., right? Like you got to do those movements. But if your goal is to build muscle, I mean, if you don't feel the bench press, go ahead and try the pec deck machine or maybe the cables, right? Like there are so many choices, and people shouldn't feel like some exercises are compulsory.
Yeah. And I think that oftentimes that gets in people's heads, because a lot of times when they want to develop a specific muscle group, they seek out somebody that has great development in that muscle group. You know, they find the guy in the gym that has the biggest shoulders or the biggest triceps. What's often missed in that equation, and then they, you know, usually that person, like let's say you find the guy in the gym with the biggest back and you say, how do I build my back? And they say heavy barbell rows. That's how I did it. But oftentimes people that have outstanding development in a muscle group, genetics have a lot to do with that. My triceps are a great muscle group for me, but I don't do anything particularly special for my triceps. I just have an easier time activating them, which is why dumbbell kickbacks work great for me. I don't think they work great for everybody. You have good triceps too, and that's why dumbbell kickbacks work great for you. But for somebody that can't, you know, engage their triceps well, I don't think that kickbacks are a great movement because they're not going to feel that working. So there's a lot of individuality there. So I think sometimes people try to follow what the elite people do for that specific muscle group, and usually you need to do almost the opposite because what's going to work for you isn't really going to work for them.
Exactly. Thank you. All right. Okay, next question. Will I lose muscle if I take a week off training?
No, not at all. Not at all. The body has an amazing ability to retain muscle tissue, more so than people realize. I think oftentimes when people take a week off of training, they feel really soft and like they're just withering away. But there's a couple of things. One, that's largely in their head. You know, we tend to feel smaller when we step away from the weights for a few days. There are some reductions in like inflammation. Usually sometimes we feel like we're shrinking when we start to deflate a little bit, and it's just a lot of times inflammation and maybe decreases in glycogen storage, but you really aren't losing any muscle tissue. And then along those lines, you could take a month off of training and you would lose some muscle tissue, but the amount would be small. And then secondarily, muscle memory is such a powerful thing. If you took an entire month off of training, my guess is that you would probably be back to where you were within a week, maybe less. Muscle memory is an incredibly powerful tool. And even with lower volumes, so if you take a week off of training, yeah, you won't lose anything. But even with lower volumes, some studies have shown, if I remember off the top of my head, there was one study that showed that once you reach a certain level of muscle mass, you can maintain that level of muscle mass with like half of the volume that you normally do. And so it doesn't take a lot to maintain what you have. And then, like I said, muscle memory is a really powerful thing. For those that don't know, muscle memory is when you reach a certain level of training, you've developed to this point in your training with muscle mass and strength, and then you take time off. You know, you may lose muscle mass and strength, but it comes back much quicker than it did the first time. It may, if you train for 10 years and reach a certain level after 10 years, you can take a lot of time off, and it won't take you nearly as long. Anybody who's ever seen former athletes get back in the gym, you know, people who, I won't go into all the reasons why physiologically, but there's research that shows that the mechanisms that allow muscle memory to take place, it can last for 20 years. So if I'm an athlete and I train really hard and I reach an elite level, and then I take 5 years off, when I get back into the gym, it won't take me 10 years. I may lose everything in 5 years, but it won't take me 10 years to get back to where I was. It would realistically probably take me a year, maybe not even, because of the muscle memory factor. So don't be afraid to take time off. It's helpful for recovery. It's helpful for your joints and long-term recovery, and you'll only be better for it in the long run.
Yeah, I feel like that information you're provided is it's great, especially for people that have gone through injuries. Sometimes they feel like, oh man, I just had an injury. What am I going to do now? I'm going to lose all my muscle mass. And they feel really, really down. And yeah, with this information that you're providing, well, it gives them hope, that once they get back to the gym, they will actually be able to get back to where they were pretty quickly.
Yeah. And sometimes my clients think I'm crazy because it works body part. It's muscle group specific too. Sometimes somebody may, they may get a slight injury to their knee and they're like, well, I can't, I can't do anything with my knee. And, they're like, what can we do to work around this? Should we go in and do some leg extensions or leg curls or, light squats? But usually, with a small injury, you just need to leave it alone. And so I'm like, we just won't train legs for 2 weeks. And they're like, what? We won't train legs for 2 weeks? I'll wither away to nothing. And then they're kind of surprised to notice that they don't really lose anything in that process. And they get healthier much faster. I think sometimes you're right. I think sometimes in the process of trying to overcome an injury, people can't stay out of the gym and they keep re-aggravating an injury that, probably just needs to be left alone for a little bit.
Okay, this question is quite interesting. Will masturbation affect my ability to build muscle?
No. It probably comes from what boxers used to say all the time, is that no sex before boxing, right? When in training. No, it won't impact it. The only thing is that I would say if you're doing it excessively before your training sessions, maybe, that might be an issue because you're going to exhaust yourself. The same goes for sex. The same, if you're exhausting yourself before your training sessions, then yes, that's probably the case. But overall, no, it's not going to be a problem. There are some acute impacts with hormones, and masturbation and sex. Your body reads them similarly, but you're gonna see hormones spike during the act and then fall after the act. But as long as you're not reaching excessive levels with either, then you're going to be totally fine.
Okay, next question. What would you recommend to someone who wants to build muscle, but can only train 2 to 3 times a week and for less than 1 hour each session?
Gotcha. So, that's a good question because I know time constraints are a big thing for a lot of people. The thing you need to look at first is the 2 most important factors in training: volume, which is the number of sets and reps you do, and intensity, how intense those sets you're doing are. And they kind of have an inverse relationship. Anybody who's ever worked out inherently understands this, even if they've never really thought about it. But the harder you work in your training session, the less work you can do. If you go into the gym and you're working extremely, extremely hard, taking every set to failure, you're not going to have a 3-hour workout. So the more time constrained you are, the more intense your sessions should be. So for that reason, if you can only get in there 2 to 3 times a week, I think you need to come up with a split where you're training at least every muscle group at least once per week. If you can get in there 3 days per week, I would suggest training each muscle group 1.5 times a week, maybe along those lines. But anyway, I think that just focusing on intensity is going to be a lot more effective. Doing things like supersetting, drop setting, intensity techniques of that nature. Because if you're only training 2 days a week, you get a lot of recovery time. So you don't really need to hold back. You're not going to be in the gym the next day having to go through it all again. So just get in there for the time that you can. Train extremely hard. I think most of your sets should come near failure, with several of them going to absolute failure. And for those that don't know, going to failure is just when you're training performing a set where you can't do a single other rep. In fact, you attempt the final rep and you fail on that last one. And so I think just focusing more on intensity and don't get too bogged down trying to increase your volume, because it's, if you have time limits, you're not going to be able to keep adding a set here or there.
Would you recommend doing full body workouts on those days?
I think it depends on how advanced you are. Because if you're a newer to training, maybe within the first couple of years, I do think whole body workouts would be a great thing. But one thing that becomes problematic with whole body workouts is the more advanced you become in your training career, the more volume you do need at a certain point to produce further growth. Even if it's really intense, at a certain point, 1 or 2 sets for a single muscle group isn't going to cut it. So I think starting off with whole body workouts would be good. And then maybe progressing to the point where you do an upper lower type of split. And then if you can get into there 3 days a week, one thing you could do is just split your body over the course of 3 days. You could do, if you're doing 3 days a week, you could do upper, lower, and just keep alternating every week. So that could be possible. So if you do upper, lower, and you can do 3 days per week, you're training each muscle group, 1.5 times per week, essentially. But another option is you train each muscle group once a week, and you could do something like chest and shoulders, back and arms, and legs. So, that would provide a little more specialization attention on each of those muscle groups. So there's plenty of good options. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. But I think that, I think you can adjust with over time, but what I laid out right there provides you with 3 different great options within those that are a little more time constrained and can only train 3 times a week.
Got it. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, next question. If I cannot sleep 8 hours per day, will I still be able to make gains?
Yes, yeah, you can. Probably not as good as if you slept 8 hours a day, though. I know people hate hearing that, but I would set. Now there is some individuality here as well. You hear me say that all the time. There's some individuality with it, but some people can sleep 7 hours a night and still make great progress and honestly, some people can probably make optimal progress. But I think that once you get under 7 hours, then you're probably hindering your progress to a degree. I would like to see most people sleeping 8 hours. I know that it's not always possible. Age is also an important factor in this. The younger you are, the more sleep that you need. Do I think that 7 hours would be ideal for a 22-year-old trainee? No, probably not. I think you would need 8 hours if you're about 22 years old. But at 45 years old, 7 hours would probably do it. The older you get, the less sleep you require. And it gets harder to sleep anyway. So, I would hear, now this is people hate hearing this. Lifters hate hearing this. I would really like to see people prioritizing their sleep as much as they do their meal plans and their training programs and their supplement programs. People get really into, they'll spend $100 on the new supplement, but if I tell them to prioritize their sleep and turn off Netflix and, make some time for their sleep, they don't want to do it. But arguably, I think that getting enough sleep will have a bigger impact than most supplements out there.
Great answer. Thank you for that. Okay, next question. If I could only afford one supplement, what would you recommend?
Easy choice.
If the goal is to build muscle.
Yeah, easy choice. Creatine monohydrate. I think it is a great supplement. For some reason, I always get this from people. They're like, what supplement should I take? And I say, are you taking creatine? And they're like, well, I was taking it for a while, but I haven't taken it. And I'm like, why did you stop taking it? Because it is the absolute most proven supplement that exists on the market. It's really cheap. It's a cheap supplement to get. You don't need a lot of the newer, fancier versions. You don't need, creatine ethyl ester or hydrochloride, just regular creatine monohydrate. You can usually get 100 servings for about $7, $8, something along those lines. And so 5 grams a day, just take it. It's it's not a stimulant, so you're not going to like feel jolted up from it, but it works. It works for the majority of people. And so I would say that. I'm going to put a runner up though, because creatine is so cheap, you can buy that and probably buy another supplement.
What would that be?
Vitamin D.
Vitamin D.
I think a lot of people are really lacking in vitamin D. A lot of the research shows that when you're lacking in vitamin D, your strength will drop. I think 2,000 IUs to 5,000 IUs is a great dosage per day, depending on how much sun you get. But I think creatine and vitamin D, I'll put those two together. If you can take those two supplements per day, they're very cheap supplements. They're not as sexy and as exciting as some of what people probably thought I would say. But those would be the two. If you're on a limited budget, go for those two and you're going to get plenty of bang for your buck.
All right. Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Okay, next question. Do I need to train to failure every single set?
No. And, I'll even speak from experience. Early on in my training career, I did that. I think everybody, I don't know if any of your followers remember like Dorian Yates style of training. There was like the Max OT style of training. If anybody remembers that, Skip LaCour used to do it all the time. And I actually know Skip now. But in the early part of my training career, I used to do every set to failure. Mostly I just got tired. I was struggling with recovery. One thing that you miss with Dorian Yates, for example, his style of training, he would say he would take every set to failure. But when you looked at his training sessions, he would do low volume. He would take maybe 3 or 4 sets to failure for chest, let's say that. 3 to 5 sets to failure. And they were very intense sessions, sets. But the thing was, he would do a lot of warm-up sets going into those working sets to failure. And his warm-up sets were like at the intensity of most other people's working sets. You know what I mean? So what he would do is he would take maybe, 3, sometimes like 2 sets to failure, 2 to 3 sets to failure. But he would do a lot of sub-max sets before he reached those. And I'm sure that those were accumulating volume for a muscle growth impact. I think one of the biggest mistakes that newer trainees, they exert themselves by going to failure too much. So like one thing that you need to realize is if you stop a rep or 2 short of failure, a lot of the research shows that you are getting 98 to 99% of the muscle growth benefits that you would get if you went to absolute failure. But going to absolute failure causes a lot of central nervous system fatigue. Anybody who's gone into the gym, if you go into the gym and you do 6 sets for 8 reps, and you go in the gym and you do those 6 sets for 8 reps, and you stop 2 reps shy of failure on all of those, which is still pretty intense training session. You wake up the next day, you're going to have enough energy to train hard the next day. But if you take those 6 sets of 8 reps all to failure, you're going to be completely trashed the next day. You're not going to have the ability to train very hard the following day. So I think failure is a very useful tool, but it is a very intense tool, and it needs to be used wisely and sparingly. My recommendation is maybe go to failure, depending on who you are, 1 to 3 times per training session, and try to save it for your lagging muscle groups. If you have really strong triceps like myself, for example, I don't think you should be training them to failure that much. Save that recovery ability for something that really needs work. For me, like my chest doesn't grow very easily. So I take a lot more sets to failure for my chest, none for my triceps.
Yeah, I'm all in. Brody on the line, I'm tapping in. Got out here pulling the strings for me. A girl on the line, she feeling me. Preoccupied by the motivation. Put in the time, pay the entry fee. Bro on the right, yeah, he kinda nice. Inside of my mind, no one's real as me. Lately, life has been gorgeous. Wake up to clear, my eyes hit record. Praise up to God, I ain't chasing no bitch. Swinging and miss, got me hitting these licks. I get the orders, don't get it.